Morena koutou, e te whānau. Just a short devotional video this morning, just to check in and to see how you are. How are you doing? Level 3, I know a little bit more freedom today, but really still quite restricted. But I sense during these times the Lord's been speaking to me about my heart, about my inner world, because the Bible is really clear that from Proverbs 4:23, it says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Another version says, guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. So guarding our heart is the essence of nurturing our well-being, our wholeness. See, our wholeness, our identity doesn't come from circumstances. Wow, I'm good today because we're not in lockdown, or I'm struggling because we're in level 4, or whatever the case is. No, our well-being comes from within, from our heart. And when the Bible uses that word heart, as it does over 800 times, not once does it refer to this literal organ that pumps blood, but just as much as our body's well-being is determined by the health of our literal heart, so the wholeness, our shalom, our well-being holistically is determined by our innermost being, the core, the essence of who we are, because within us lives the Christ. And out of our hearts, out of our innermost being flows rivers of living water. So when I ask you, how are you? How are you really today? I'm actually asking, how's your heart? And what the Bible does is we go to Psalm 61, because I want to encourage you to write your own psalm today. And maybe you can grab a pen and a piece of paper and author your own worship song to God from the reality of where we're currently at. Let me just show you how David does this, because if there's something that you see in Psalms, it is the beautiful honesty of David and the other authors of the Psalms, the honesty and vulnerability of where they're at. So there's a threefold process we're going to look at this morning as we consider writing our own worship psalm song to the Lord this morning. In Psalm 61, David writes, hear my cry, O God, attend to my prayer. From the end of the earth I will cry to you. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. So David's being honest here. His heart is overwhelmed. How is your heart today? David doesn't hide that from the Lord. He doesn't hide it from himself. He is honest. He is vulnerable. He acknowledges the state of his heart. And people aren't sure exactly what was happening in the psalm, the context of it, but somehow David has been banished from Jerusalem because he's what feels like at the end of the earth. Maybe because his son Absalom has turned on him. Maybe because there's some marauding army that's chasing him, wanting to kill him. But whatever, the state of his heart is overwhelmed. So the first step in us writing our own psalm is, my heart is. How would you complete that? Think about that. Maybe write that down. My heart is, for David, overwhelmed. But then he continues. In verse 3 says, for you have been a shelter for me, a strong tower from the enemy. I will abide in your tabernacle forever. I will trust in the shelter of your wings. And that the beautiful movement of the psalm is from David acknowledging the honesty of what's going on in his heart, but there's an unfolding revelation of who God is for David in that situation. Who is God revealing himself to you in the reality of your heart situation? For David, there's 4 metaphors he gives there. For you are becoming a shelter for me. Secondly, a strong tower from the enemy. Remember, this is all in the context of his heart being overwhelmed. Thirdly, his longing is to abide in your tabernacle, Lord, your dwelling place. And fourthly, I will trust in the shelter of your wings. Beautiful metaphors of who God is becoming for David in the midst of his situation of being overwhelmed. Who is God revealing himself to you as in this situation? So our psalm could be, my heart is, and I am starting to understand you as. God, you are revealing yourself to me as. So for me, this time last year, nearly a year ago, my dad passed away, sadly. So if I was writing my psalm then, and even that continues even to today, my heart is sad. My heart is heavy. My dad had passed away. So we don't deny what's going on in our hearts. We acknowledge, we grow in awareness of what's going on in our heart, and we bring that before the Lord in prayer. My heart is sad. But you know what I discovered? The unfolding revelation of God as my comforter, as my healer, as my peace. So my heart is sad. And God, I'm understanding you more as my comforter, as my strength. Who is that for you today? And thirdly and lastly, as we go down to verse 8 of Psalm 61, David finishes the psalm, as he nearly always does, in praise. So I will sing praise to your name forever, David says, that I may daily perform my vows. So he finishes in worship. He starts with acknowledging the reality of his heart. He continues by this unfolding revelation of who God is becoming for him, and then he finishes in worship. So for me, my heart is sad, or my heart was sad, but I'm discovering you, God, as my comforter, and I will praise you as my Father who art in heaven. That's what I discovered. That's what the sadness of the reality of my dad passing enabled an even deepening revelation of God as my Father who art in heaven. So there we go. There's a little exercise that you could express today through a psalm of worship. God bless.